Hello, my name is Tim Nurse, and I serve as the president of Making Sense International. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this discussion today with 3 experts in the field of youth savings groups and more than 226 people registered online from 49 countries. Before we begin, a brief word about Making Sense and our knowledge management platform. Making Sense is a social enterprise that provides capacity building, training, and technical assistance in the area of economic opportunity and youth development. We also have developed the Youth Economic Opportunity Learning Platform, a demand-driven knowledge management initiative that helps stakeholders worldwide to design, implement, and evaluate high-impact programs, policies, and partnerships. This webinar is part of our learning platform and is one in a series of Apply It webinars. These webinars provide the global youth development community with a convenient opportunity to learn from other organizations about concrete tools and knowledge that they can apply to their work. Today, we will be exploring key strategies for creating effective, scalable youth savings group programs that have been developed by Plan International and CARE under the Barclays supported Banking on Change program. Webinar participants, we welcome your questions and contributions throughout this virtual learning event. Please respond to the polls that you'll see on the right side of your screen and write questions into the chat box that's located at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We also welcome your tweeting and Facebook posts on key points you take away from this event using the hashtag #YouthEO. Our speakers for today's event are Catherine Hughes. Catherine is the Financial Inclusion Advisor for Asia at CARE International UK. She provides technical advice, project management support, and monitoring and knowledge management support across several financial inclusion projects in Africa and Asia. Catherine is now leading the financial inclusion strategy development for Asia. Rachel Lindley is the program manager at Plan UK for the Banking on Change program. Rachel has 12 years of experience of charity and program management, including 9 years specializing in microfinance and increasingly micro savings programs. She's passionate about enabling young people to fulfill their potential and sees youth economic empowerment programs as a key part of this goal. Stella Turaza. Stella is a senior microfinance and savings group specialist in East Africa, an expert in the field of community-managed microfinance. With 19 years experience, she has designed and implemented savings group programs in 7 regions across Tanzania that have integrated income generation and social activities, including youth employment, sanitation and hygiene, and maternal and child health. Matthew Wilson. Matthew is Assistant Vice President, Global Community Investment at Barclays, where he is responsible for leading the bank's Banking on Change partnership. Prior to this role, he worked for the Social Innovation Team at Barclays and was Global Program and Partnership Manager at UNICEF UK. So thank you all. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and Matt, we'll turn to you first.
Thanks, Tim. And I guess I'll just start by thanking everyone who's joined today. It's great to see everyone sort of signing in the chat box and to see how many people have joined our webinar and have voiced their interest in hearing more about our youth savings group model. I'll begin by giving you a brief overview of our partnership. So to start, I'll just say that Banking on between K, which we've been delivering since 2009. In 2013, we started the second phase of the partnership. We reflected on what we learned over the previous 3 years and decided to tailor our approach. We worked across 7 countries, and we have a much stronger focus on 2 things. First of all, reaching young people, and second of all, the delivery of in-depth skills training in order to help people manage their money and invest in small businesses. And what the partnership aims to do is break down the barriers to help the barriers to financial inclusion, which is a problem that about 2 billion people face today. And I think this is a really exciting and a relevant focus, especially for us at Barclays, for a couple of reasons. First of all, we know that access to savings, credit, and formal bank accounts enables individuals to invest in small businesses and increase their household income. But also what we've seen over the last 6 years, and especially in phase 2 of the partnership, is that it really transforms the lives of people in some of the world's poorest communities where Barclays has had a presence for quite some time. And especially young people and women We see that it reduces poverty, it increases social equality, and it encourages economic growth. So Banking on Change takes a savings rather than a credit-led approach to financial inclusion. And what I'd like to do on this side quickly is just give you a bit of an overview of this financial inclusion ladder that we've developed. If you look under step one, where we start is we begin by identifying the most financially excluded communities, targeting young people and specifically those people that live on less than $2 a day. These young people are then organized into groups and taught the savings group methodology. And as you'll hear a bit later in the presentation, in order to reach these youth effectively, we had to adapt our outreach and training methodologies. Step two, under informal financial inclusion. So once the youth are in a savings group, we would say that they're now informally financially included, meaning that they have access to a safe place to save their money, make contributions to a social fund to pay for emergency expenses, can take loans from the group. But at this stage, they also have access through Banking on Change to in-depth skills training to help them invest in and grow their income-generating activities. Through Banking on Change, over the last 3 years, over 100,000 youth members have received our bespoke entrepreneurship training, which we call Enterprise Your Life, which you'll hear about a bit more later, accompanied with financial literacy training. Another 100,000 youth have received employability training to help them get into jobs. And what's been really interesting is that we found that the trainings were really timely and relevant for youth, because this is a point in their lives where they're in a period transitioning from childhood to adulthood, but also from financial dependence to financial independence. And what we've seen is results from before and after the training assessments show that there's a really impressive increase in their knowledge. And then finally, step three, formal financial inclusion. When the groups have matured and they're ready to link to a formal bank account, they receive bank literacy training and linkage training. And this has been a really good opportunity for Barclays employees to get involved in skill-based volunteering. So the Barclays employees are able to go out into the communities and work with the groups, teach them about our products, how to open an account, how to use the account effectively. And what we found is this really helps the linkage process, and that it builds confidence in the groups, but also builds trust between the groups and banks. Whether they choose to link to Barclays or another bank, that trust is developed. And then finally, we've also worked with our retail teams to develop bespoke savings group products with no fees. In Uganda, we've developed mobile products that allow groups to deposit and withdraw funds from a mobile wallet, and also to send digital records of their ledger books. And then we've also developed an overdraft product, which provides groups with access to credit. So the last slide for me is some of the key achievements. I mean, we're absolutely thrilled with the progress that we've made and success of the partnership, not only over the last 6 years, dating back to phase one, but as well as phase two, the progress we've made since 2013. Delivering a program like this is really difficult, but our partners care and plan, and their delivery partners have been absolutely brilliant. And we've achieved, or in many cases, overachieved our targets. So some of the ones that I find really exciting are, in 6 years, we've reached over 750,000 people, including over 300,000 youth in phase two. More than 11,000 youth savings groups have been established. 116 new businesses have been started. Half of those have been by youth. Over 5,000 groups. The number on the left is a little bit outdated. We've actually now linked over 5,000 groups to the formal banking system, and half of them have been to Barclays. And then possibly my favorite statistics from the partnership is that over the last 3 years, savings groups have mobilized $34 million in savings, which is a really exciting figure for us to share. So that's a quick overview of the program, and now I'll turn it over to Rachel, who can introduce the savings group model.
Thanks, Matt, and hi everyone. And let me echo Matt's thanks to everyone for joining this webinar and to Making Sense for hosting it for us. So as you heard from Matt, in phase of Banking on Change, we had a deliberate focus on targeting young people. Let me explain very briefly why we adopted that focus. First, when we had no age targeting, that young people were not joining traditional savings groups. So in phase one, around 18% of all our members were under the age of 25. That was with no age targeting at all. And yet we know that young people are more financially excluded than adults. And we know also from the Global Findex survey that around half of young people say they are saving money regularly. So if they're not saving in formal bank accounts and they're not joining savings groups, we felt there was an unmet demand that we could try to meet. We also know from the ILO that young people are 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed, and the Solutions for Youth Coalition has estimated that the global economy will need to create 5 million jobs every month to keep track with the 1 billion children who are going to transition to young adulthood over the next decade. And finally, we know also that the percentage of young people in the Global South is high and growing. And so let us assume that the global economy can't create 5 million jobs every month. That means that young people are going to need to find ways to create their own livelihoods, to develop their own income generating activities. And for that, they're going to need access to finance, access to skills training, and access to support networks. And all of these things youth savings groups can provide. So that was why in phase 2 of Banking on Change, we decided to focus on youth to see if we could make the traditional savings group model work for young people. I think at the end of phase 2, having formed over 11,700 youth savings groups, we can say, yes, it does work. And we also wanted to take what we learned from this 3 years of programming experience at scale and systematise it into a youth savings group model to help others in the sector also start focusing more on young people in savings groups. So that's the background to the youth savings group model, why we set about developing it. And the next couple of slides just show a little bit more illustration of some of those stats I just mentioned. So this slide, you can see on the left, we have adults. 2011, 27.5% of adults had a bank account. By 2014, that was around 33%, so good increase. On the right, we have young people. The blue column shows 17% of young people had a bank account in 2011 and 20% in 2014. So you can see the number of adults, the percentage of adults having a bank account is much higher than young people. And you can also see that the gap is closing more slowly for young people, so that the increase over the last 3 years for young people was just around 3%, whereas for adults it's around 5.5%. So this is an illustration of the greater financial exclusion of young people. And then finally, this slide just illustrates the youth bulge. What you can see here is that in the more developed regions of the world, around 72% of the population is over the age of 25, whereas in the least developed regions, only 40% is over 25, and the vast majority are under 25. Africa. So that just speaks to the point I was making, that there is a global youth challenge in facing young people, financial exclusion and unemployment, and that challenge is only going to increase over the next decade. So let me now hand over to Kat, who's going to talk through the first set of principles in our youth savings group model, which we hope will help tackle some of these challenges.
Rachel, if I can just jump in before we move to Kat. There was a question from the online about what do we mean by youth? And could you briefly just talk about the different segments that you're targeting, both age or economic backgrounds? We know more about the particular youth that we're targeting for youth savings groups.
Sure, yes, it is a very good question. We in Banking on Change adopted the UN definition of youth, which goes all the way up to 35. However, we did have more of a focus on the 18 to 24-year-old category. That said, we did have some in-school youth groups, in-school youth savings groups, but I think the majority of our members were in the out-of-school but below 25 age bracket. And as I think Matt mentioned, again, we had a focus on the people living on under $2 a day. Kat will say a little bit more, I think, about the differentiation that we found was necessary for all these different categories of young people.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you. So yeah, as Rachel has pointed out, the need for engaging youth, we kind of looked at how we can actually do this a bit better through the youth savings group model. As already mentioned, CARE, Plan and Barclays are all keen supporters of the VSLA model, or essentially savings groups, as a proven savings-led approach to financial inclusion. But in practice, the guidance around implementing this model is not really adapted for reaching and supporting youth. So we sought to test different approaches in banking on change to engage youth in savings groups and support them throughout that process, to understand what adaptations needed to be made to the model, and what principles and guidelines we could draw out of that to share with others who are wanting to. And so what we found were 9 key principles, which we consolidated into 3 key areas for adaptation. The first around targeting and forming youth savings groups, so essentially looking at outreach approaches. The second around supporting youth savings groups for social and economic empowerment. Again, so looking at how to keep them interested in continuing within the savings groups. And scaling and sustaining youth groups. So essentially, how can the model be replicated in a sustainable way? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the category of outreach under the first area, before handing over to Rachel to cover the other principles under the second area. And I'm only going to focus on 3 of those principles, because there are 5 in this category, but in the interest of time, I'll keep it short. But of course, you can read more about those in the full report. So essentially, principle 1 is all about planning and investing in the outreach for youth. So under Banking on Change, youth group formation in the first 6 months was actually really low, and we realised through our local field officers that reaching young people needed a different approach. And so we began to identify and approach them through existing local youth groups, through sports centres, religious places such as churches and mosques, existing youth social spaces, and also looked at youth-oriented media, including local radio. Our facilitator, or our trainers, also worked around school hours and arranged meetings at evenings and weekends to essentially adapt to the schedule of the youth that we wanted to reach. And we also engaged other stakeholders in the community and parents to ensure that they were supportive of this. And so as a result, the group formation doubled in the following 6 months and continued to grow thereafter with word of mouth and demonstration to peers of how these youth savings groups were working. We also recognised that young people responded better to their peers or people around the same age. And so we looked at recruiting youth village agents to support and create youth groups in the field. And for those young people who were sceptical, staff were also able to arrange visits to already established successful groups so that they could see the changes for themselves. So essentially, the recommendation under this principle is that in order to reach young people, we recommend working through young people and meet them in their own spaces. So therefore, this is likely to require more time than the standard group formation procedures. And so practitioners need to look at investing more time and resources in youth-friendly, peer-based and gender-sensitive outreach. And so it's also worth considering that when setting targets, it's important to look at allowing enough time for slower progress in the first year compared to standard group formation. Moving on to another principle. So we were looking at membership criteria. And a crucial principle under the traditional VSLA methodology is that groups should be self-selecting, so that this supports sufficient social capital within the groups and trust among the members to function properly. So this is equally important for youth savings groups, but what we recognised along with other peer NGOs is that for young people, their needs are quite different, and their needs also reflect their different life stages. So we wanted to determine the value in segmenting or clustering groups by different characteristics such as gender or age or life stage. And what we found, for example, in Ghana, was that youth groups whose members were mostly younger and likely to be in school were very much different to the older members who had left school. So those in school were often encouraged to join a youth savings group by their families through their schools, and also youth village agents, so that they could improve their financial skills and save money for their education. Although they would only be able to save small amounts on a weekly basis, and so relied on their families for those savings. However, the out of school young people, in contrast, had already saved more and had already have existing sources of income, and so we're actually looking to borrow more as well. And so we found not only this, but it's also useful to segregate the youth savings group by life stage in order to make training more appropriate and delivered according to their life stage and age group. So in encouraging homogeneity in a youth savings group can also have some negative impact. So it could mean that the most marginalised young people remain excluded, and so our advice around this is to make sure that those people are included, or care needs to be taken to include them and build relationships with the people around them so that they are included. But overall, the recommendation under this principle is to consider forming homogeneous groups with similar needs in order to strengthen the formation and management and the quality of the group. So whilst groups should be self-selecting, it's up to the facilitators to consider their needs and life stages and take care not to include, or take care to make sure that those marginalised and vulnerable young people are also included. And so just one more principle I wanted to talk a bit about was around engaging with families, because this was quite interesting for us, especially the research that was done in depth by IBS. And what we found here was that for many people, or for many young members, belonging to a youth savings group is actually a family affair, as we've termed it, rather than something they did on their own. So in other words, the membership is part of a larger, more complex picture of saving, borrowing, and income generation, and other financial flows within a household. So young people seem to see themselves as part of a household economic unit, and therefore want to contribute to that unit. For example, in India and Egypt, we found that most members mentioned savings goals around improving their household and family living standards. And in Ghana, they also cited caring for parents in old age as a reason to save. And so this was interesting. It was an interesting insight into the role that savings groups might play in intergenerational transfers, and particularly in respect to educational expenses. Additionally, we found that there's more than just a financial benefit for the family. For example, we found that some parents were beginning to look to their children for advice on financial planning once the young people had received that training, particularly when the parents themselves were not literate. However, it should be noted, whilst underbanking on change and through our research, we didn't encounter any examples of coercion in relation to share outs or borrowing by older family members. I think it's something that we all need to be aware of and be alert to that potential risk. And that is actually covered under another principle in more detail. So finally, the recommendation in this principle is that where young people save money from parents or caregivers and may pass on loans to adults, it should be captured in a group constitution so that the group members are all aware and supportive of that. Again, parents and caregivers should be familiarised with the youth savings group principles, and potentially they could be included in some of the training so that they're aware and supportive of the group and the group's function. And as mentioned, facilitators need to be conscious of that risk for parents that might default or access younger persons' funds through coercion. Is that young people can be savers and they can be members of savings groups with just some small tweaks and considerations in that outreach stage. And that's what we've tried to demonstrate on this slide around the performance of the youth groups in comparison to the standard more adult or older member youth savings groups. So I'll hand over to Rachel now.
Maybe, Catherine, before you do, can I just, there's a few questions from the floor, if I can just throw in there on these principles. And so one is if you talk just a little bit about the difference in gender. Has youth savings groups been taken up by girls more than boys? What's been the dynamic? Has it only been contextual? And then also curious in terms of what do you see as the length of engagement for young people in savings groups? Is it one cycle? Is it 2? Is it 3 to 4 years? And are you seeing then some graduation of youth savers to adult savings groups, or do the groups dissipate after a while? Just tell us a little bit more about the evolution and the makeup if you can.
Sure. So yeah, in terms of gender, we did actually find that there was actually a higher inclusion of young males in our savings groups. And we did try to dig into this a bit deeper, and probably more research can be done around that. But it was quite interesting for us, where traditionally we've seen higher percentage rates of women in our adult groups. That it was interesting to see a lot more males were engaged at the younger savings groups, and that might be due to having access to income. It might be that they're less mobile or more likely to stay within a certain community for a longer period than women or the younger girls. But yeah, it's something I'm opening up as well to Rachel and others if they want to input on that. But that was an interesting finding for us. And then in terms of the length of time within a savings group, we did find that in general, young people, I guess, as I've mentioned, you need to spend a lot more time in that initial support stage with young members. But again, youth are quite keen to have the share outs a bit earlier than the adult groups. So rather than necessarily a full 1 year cycle, a lot of the youth were happier to actually shorten that cycle to 9 months so that they could access their savings to support their educational needs or household needs, as mentioned. But I understand, I think Plan is actually doing a bit more research into this and actually looking at specific guidance on the timelines and the support needed at each stage of the savings groups timeline. But I'm not sure, Rachel, did you want to input a bit more on that, or save it to later?
Yeah, Rachel, why don't we turn it back to you, and you can go through your principles and then add anything else you might have to on those 2 questions.
Sure. Well, let me just pick up on Kat's last point before I move on to the next section of the principles. So on the life cycle of youth savings groups, as Kat said, some of them did prefer shorter cycles, say 6 months rather than 12 months. But we did find there was a need for a longer duration of support, particularly, as I'll come on to in a moment, repeating some of the trainings in later cycles that we'd already given in the first cycle. We found that some youth became more engaged and more keen and more willing to participate in trainings once they'd been through one cycle and had the benefit of one share out and seen the benefit of being in a youth savings group itself. And then the manual that I think Kat was referring to is something that Plan Canada is working on with Aflatoon to produce a kind of integrated savings group manual for young people that integrates the usual savings groups training procedures with some financial literacy and life skills training. And I believe that lasts for at least a 2-year cycle. And that should be available, I believe, in the next month or so. So moving on to the next section of the Youth Savings Group Model Principles, and just to note, by the way, that I believe Making Sense has circulated the link to the full Youth Savings Group Model document. So in that you'll find a breakdown of all 10 principles and much more supporting evidence. What we're doing here is just talking you through a few of the principles with 1 slide per cluster of principles. So let me take you through the section on supporting youth savings groups for social and economic empowerment after the forming and outreach stage. Just 2 principles actually in this section, so I'll speak briefly about them both. The first is on the need for needs-based training for young people. This is something we found absolutely essential. It will extend the duration of your programming, and it will of course add to the expense of the programming, but we found it to be one of the most impactful elements of the programme. So Banking on Change was delivering financial literacy skills training, enterprise and entrepreneurship skills training, and employability skills training for young people. We did pre and post tests for the financial literacy and enterprise skills training. And for the financial literacy, we found the knowledge uplift was 15%, and for the enterprise skills training, it was 43%, so a really significant increase. And that reflects, I think, both the fairly low base level of knowledge that young people had on enterprise skills, but also the effectiveness of the curriculum we were using. The curriculum was called Enterprise Your Life, developed in partnership with Making Sense. And this graphic on the left that we've included, showing some football or soccer coaching image, reflects the coaching and participatory nature of the curriculum. So rather than simply running through business skills training, the Enterprise Your Life curriculum takes a coaching and mentoring approach and helps young people to figure out, first of all, who they are and what they want to do with their own lives. And secondly, alongside the business skills, the pure business skills training, it has some helpful life skills modules covering things like negotiating skills. So if your father won't allow you to do a particular business, how might you be able to negotiate with your family to get around some of those constraints? The financial literacy skills training was also specially adapted for young people. We included learning games rather than straightforward classroom-based teaching. And we found the most helpful element of the financial literacy skills training was the savings goals module, where young people were encouraged to set their own savings goals, figure out what they were saving, work their way towards it. And we found that was one of the most empowering things for young people. We had a lot of focus group discussion feedback saying, I didn't know I could save before, now I've got saving and spending much more wisely. I'm much more focused, and I know where I'm going in my life. All savings groups programs working with young people to incorporate some specially adapted trainings for the young people. Finally, the second principle in this section is around the social fund. This is an interesting one. I'm sure you'll know that the traditional VSLA methodology has a social fund as a core part of it. So each week, along with coming with your savings and any loan repayments, you come with a small coin which goes into the social fund, and that's used for emergencies in the group. When we were setting off in phase 2 of Banking on Change, we thought maybe the social fund wouldn't be so relevant for young people. Perhaps they would have fewer dependents, so fewer household emergencies that they would need to cater for. But we found we gave young people the option to have the social fund, and all groups continued with the social fund. It was very well used. We found at the end of the programme, the average balance per youth savings group in the social fund was $37. And for adults, it was $49, so slightly more for adults, but that's because they were typically saving slightly more. But $37 per group shows that it was definitely a welcome part of the programme. All voluntary contributions. The uses of the social fund, some of them were the traditional uses, so emergency loans in the case of, let's say, a healthcare shock. But also we found that some youth savings groups were using that social fund to invest in their community. So one group, for example, was using it to buy school supplies for orphans in the community who had no one else to provide for them. So we would obviously encourage facilitators to make sure that it's young people themselves who choose to have the social fund, but we would recommend you do make the option available to them because it seemed to be well received. And let me hand on to Matt now to cover the final section of the principles.
Rachel, if I can just break in one more time, just one question that's come up, or one comment you made was that training adds some cost to the model. And just maybe if you could explain more about that, is it just in terms of the upfront development costs of the curriculum, or does it add to the program once the curriculums have been developed?
Both. We did invest some funding in tailoring the curriculum that we already had for VSLAs, tailoring them specifically for young people, which was a worthwhile investment. But secondly, also in terms of delivering the training week by week, partly we were delivering 3 separate trainings, which meant the training period lasted longer than one cycle. So you do need to have your facilitators available for more than one cycle, whereas in a traditional VSLA approach, you might only support the group for one cycle. But also we were typically using village agents and community-based trainers chosen from amongst the community themselves to go and form and train groups. But we did find for some of the trainings that had a more technical nature, we needed to use paid field officers rather than the community-based volunteers for the training, so that adds some element of cost as well. And then finally, I think I mentioned the need for refresher trainings if people were If young people were perhaps more engaged in cycle 2 and wanted a refresher training, again, that will add some cost because you're repeating something that you've already done.
Okay, so once the curriculum is developed, the biggest cost might be keeping the promoter or the agent around for a longer period of time, or adding more specialized training on top of that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, then back over to Matt. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. I'm just going to highlight 3 of the principles that are related to scaling and sustaining youth savings groups before I turn it over to Stella. The first one is fostering youth leadership and advocacy. So we believe that youth savings groups can and should be participatory, and that programs should allow youth to take a lead role in designing the youth savings group programs, but also allowing the youth to implement and manage youth savings groups. And for those of us that have been out to see some of the youth banking on change groups, I think it's quite clear to us that youth are capable and they're able to, so they're brimming with confidence in how to improve. But also programs sure that they're included in national and local policy program initiatives. The second one is to commit to continuous participatory monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Ensure that the data collected can be disaggregated by age, gender, and disability at a minimum. And I think that applies or should apply for banks as well. So one of the things that we'll be doing more of at Barclays is analyzing the accounts, not only for the more traditional youth savings groups, but for the, the traditional VSLAs, but also for the youth savings groups to understand a bit more about their savings patterns and how they use our accounts. But also to build in regular reviews, to take in youth feedback and adapt programming accordingly. And then the third one I want to talk about, which I think is really exciting from my perspective from Barclays, is linking responsibly. And as we said at the bottom of the slide, linking to a formal financial institution can be a logical and attractive next step for youth savings groups. But also importantly, what we've learned, especially at Barclays, is that it's a logical and attractive proposition for banks as well. So one of the most exciting achievements from the partnership, from my perspective at least, has been our success moving linkage, which is helping the youth savings group to open an account at a formal bank or financial institution. The success moving this work from the CSR space in Barclays to the business space has been really exciting. And the way that we've done that is we've worked quite closely with our retail team, and what they've seen is that linkage presents an immense opportunity to bring new customers into formal banking, and it also enables Barclays to grow our deposits in our business and to stay relevant within the regions where we're working. Another thing that's been quite influential in this effort to move this into our business space is how represent. In the banking on change markets alone, there's an opportunity to capture $236 million in savings. And what we've also found is that group members go on to open a personal savings account. So the savings groups are a springboard into full financial inclusion. We've also seen that young people are good savers, which I think surprised a lot of us at Barclays. They're good savers. They're linked to banks. In general, I think that we found that they have a greater trust of banks than some of the traditional groups and their adult counterparts. And they're also potentially more likely to be bank literate and especially tech literate, which is really important for using mobile banking products. One of the program and implications in the model is that where there is demand from young people and youth savings groups, programs should engage with formal banks and formal financial institutions to ensure that the products they offer and the services that they offer are appropriate and that the youth savings groups have adequate training and support throughout that linkage process. And one of the ways that we've done this through Banking on Change is access to information on accounts. And what we've seen quite clearly is that information on accounts is really difficult to come by, not only as program implementers, but also for the groups. So we've developed some tools that trainers can use to capture and disseminate this information, information about all the banking products that are available to the groups. And we've also recently commissioned the State of Linkage report, which you can find online, to make this information widely available. And then the last thing I thought I'd mention is that we've also seen that youth are really keen to access credit. But what we've found in some circumstances that many youth want to grow their money very quickly, and they may be more willing to take out loans to finance risky businesses or banks and financial institutions to do is exercise even more caution when offering young people credit. And then finally, just to mention that linkage should be carried out in accordance with the Linking for Change Savings Charter, which is another advocacy tool that we've developed with the partnership to set out principles for responsible and effective linkage. So that's me. If there aren't any other questions, I'll turn it over to Stella.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
So we're having trouble hearing you. Can you just pause for a moment and then begin again?
I'll first of all talk about the first principles, like how did we mobilize youth to form groups? In the beginning, as Rachel explained, we had some challenges in mobilizing youth. So, but because of phase one, where we had adult savings groups already in the same areas, we used adult savings groups to mobilize youth. So that brought us much better results of mobilization of youth groups. And also the growth of youth groups increased a lot after we created the teams of trainers using youth groups in accordance to the ages that we wanted to form the groups. We trained the trainers to be of the same ages. So it was really peer-to-peer training. And our youth were like 15 to 24, and then from 25 to 35. So we had this under 16, then 35 to 35. So we trained the trainers. We had the teams of trainers in who are corresponding to the ages. So those brought us better results. Also, the young field officers, we are working through partners, local NGOs. So we encourage them to be field officers. So the young field officers were very effective in this phase of forming youth groups. The younger field officers were able to communicate better with the youth. And because Plan has many other projects as well in the same areas, we were able to integrate these youth programs with the youth savings groups. We have a program called Because I'm a Girl, which encourages girl participation in communities. So we were able to integrate Plan's youth programs with the youth savings programs, and this was very effective. It brought in youth who are already organized in their spaces, talking about youth rights and other like gender rights, like early marriage, and young mothers. We also had groups dealing with sexual health that were also to form youth savings groups. So this was very effective in forming youth savings groups. I will welcome any questions, but I think we have our report will be shared online as well about the outcomes of our program. So now, if I can go to the next slide. Okay. In Tanzania, we targeted youth 25 to 35. That was our biggest group, because when you're forming a youth savings group, you want to decide where you want to focus. We wanted youths who are engaged in or wanting to start income generating activities. So the important questions were, how young do they start engaging in income generating activities? Where are they? Where do they do these income generating activities? And also, what kind of income generating activities are they engaged in? So that we can go there to their areas where we can find them easily. And as you can see from that pie chart, 62% of our youth were female, which is different, I guess, from what Rachel explained in other areas. In Tanzania, most of the youths were still female youth aged 25 to 35, and then we followed by the female youth, 17%, aged 15 to 24, and then we had male youth as well, 25 to 35, and finally the smallest group was the male youth, which were 15 to 24. So we have formed a total of 1,180 youth groups with about 29,000 youth in Plan Tanzania over the second phase of Banking on Change. That's like 2.5 years. But the good thing is that that was at the end of December 2015. Right now, more groups have been formed. So yesterday, the groups have increased up to 1,200 now. Because of the young trainers, they are still forming groups even after the conclusion of the project. So that's the targeting and forming of youth savings groups. I don't know if you have any. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide, then I'll take questions after that. So in supporting youth savings group for social and economic empowerment, in Tanzania, we focused on Enterprise Your Life. That was our most successful program. And this program was so well accepted by youths that not only youths in the new youth savings groups, but some of the older groups. So that's why you see we trained in a number, the total number of groups trained was 1,235, because even youth in the older groups, they wanted access to this training. And how did we provide this training? Is we did a training of trainers. So we had the coaches, we had the master coaches, then we had the teams of coaches, and these teams of coaches would go out and train in their groups. And actually the youths are ready to pay for this training, which means that this training is even now continuing in the communities. Even after the project has phased out, the training is continuing, the Enterprise Your Life. And the most attractive feature of this training was that it was youth-oriented with a lot of games, as you were shown in the slide on supporting youth savings group for social and economic empowerment. We had a lot of games, a lot of interaction with the trainees, so it was very well received. Although I have to mention that we did train also on business skills training and employability skills training as well. But this was the most successful training in Plan Tanzania. And we did, this program is both urban and rural areas. We have programs in urban, semi-urban, and rural areas as well. So we have in scaling and sustaining youth savings groups, we have 120 youth community trainers that are community-based and paid by the groups. Over 60 new groups have been formed since the end of December 2015, when the project officially ended. And I know this will bring questions linking to EMAs. EMAs, intermediating associations, these are apex groups. You can read more about them. We'll share the communication about what these apex groups looks like. But they are basically apex groups linking savings groups and providing savings, loans, and loan insurance as well. And we are also linking the groups to Tanzania Postal Bank. And we have one example of an intermediary association, the Muungano IMA, which has 6 youth savings groups and 158 members. All of them opened accounts with the bank. So the IMA opened their account, and each of the groups opened their own account, and each of the individual members, the 158, also has a bank account. And the Tanzania Postal Bank has this product where you can access this account via mobile phone, and you can use this account to buy shares, receive and repay loans, and the group can also disburse loans to their members through their mobile phones, and the IMA can also disburse loans and receive repayments from the groups via the mobile phone. So this has also been very successful. We have Plan has a MOU with Tanzania Postal Bank for 1 year. So it is continuing even after the end of the project. More groups are joining now. For now, we have over 500 groups that have joined now Tanzania Postal Bank. So, and we are aiming for all the 1,000 groups to have joined the banks. But at the same time that the groups are joining, the individuals also get an opportunity to open a bank account. So this is how we're talking about. So thank you. So take questions now. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Stella. No, I appreciate it. I'm sorry I had to move to the last slide. We only have a few minutes left in the webinar, but I think that's fascinating. I'm sure people really want to learn more about the Apex and some of your mobile banking opportunities. So for registrants, if you have questions, please put them out there. And while I'm waiting for more to come in, there was an earlier question by Catherine Begley. I think it's to you, Matt, in terms of, she notes that some financial institutions see youth as risky. And I'm curious, in terms of your linkage activities, what do you see as the biggest challenges to linking? And while you're answering that, happy to take other questions and we can ask them after.
Sorry, Tim, could you just say the last bit of that question again? My audio went out a bit.
Not a problem. So just, if you could say, what would be, in your mind, the largest challenges to linking youth savings groups to financial institutions?
Sure, yeah. So I guess, I think at the beginning of the question was a question about are other financial institutions nervous about linking to youth because they're quite risky. And I guess I would just say that this is something that, for Barclays at least, didn't happen overnight. We've benefited from nearly 6 years of working in partnership on Banking on Change to help us understand the groups and how they work and how they operate, and why the savings groups are an attractive model, and how the savings groups lower that risk. I would say the key things that I always hear from our retail directors is that in order to do this, you have to work with partners who know the groups quite well. So we've been quite fortunate to work with Care and Plan and people like Stella who understand these groups really well and have helped Barclays along this journey of understanding the groups ourselves. So working with partners, I think, is really important, but also being in the community. So to develop the products that we've developed in Uganda, we've spent over 200 hours in the field talking to these groups. So I think banks need to invest a lot of time and resource into understanding the groups. And once that happens, and when that happened within Barclays, I could see sort of a trend of our take on that and invest in the groups.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt. And then on the side, if you're following the main chat, you'll see that Stella's is clarifying on some questions, and there's some interest around younger youth linking to formal institutions, in that in many countries the age of majority is age 18. They may not be able to open up an account without a guardian. So Stella, can you tell us a little bit more about how you're linking younger youth below the age of 18 to formal accounts?
Okay, thank you. Younger youth, because the bank requires the children even can open a bank account, but with their guardian. So the guardian has to be involved in the bank account. But the other way that they can be linked is via their savings group, because if the savings group is linked, then they can access financial services from the bank, because the bank offers savings opportunities as well as loans to groups. The loan product hasn't yet been activated. We are still young. We're still starting the link.
Stella, you cut out there. Could you perhaps repeat your last sentence?
I'm saying that the main which they be linked is via their savings groups. And if the child wants to open an individual bank account, then they need the guardian to sponsor them to open that bank account.
To look at the plan website to learn more about this model. I think it's very exciting. There is also some questions about going back to gender, and participants are noting that the Tanzania program was seemingly very attractive to girls. Other programs may be more attractive to boys. I know in Egypt, with our work with Planned International, it was more attractive to girls. So is it just contextual, or is it marketing? What would you think is some of their key dynamics in terms of engaging girls as compared to boys, or both, in savings groups? Anyone to answer?
Okay, can I answer that?
Please.
I think in Tanzania, the effect of the adult groups, because most of them were women, they had a more influence on their female, children to join groups more than the male children,
Okay, I think we lost Elle, but I think she's saying that the entry point was the key one. And I think we noticed that in Egypt as well, in that there was already an existing adult women savings group, and that served as the entry point.
The disparity is still more boys joined than in the phase one.
Okay. Rachel or Catherine, any other comments on gender before we close?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think predominantly we've always found with the adult groups that it's the women that will join, and part of that is because there is a targeting of the poorest in the community, who tend to be women and young people. So it was just interesting from our perspective to see actually that dynamic shift a little bit, not much, but seeing that there were more boys engaged in it. But it's something that I think there was an earlier question that touched on it. It's something that we need to ensure that even if it is purely women joining or majority women joining, that they're not only empowered within the group but also within their households. So making sure that we're actually not influencing, but trying to support the relationship dynamics. And not create more harm than good. So either engaging partners in that, perhaps in the context of youth engaging parents and brothers or other guardians, to make sure that those changes and the support is recognised in the household. It was just within the groups themselves.
Great. we're going to have to close, but I just want to highlight one last point that also Stella made, is that the success of the savings group, and especially the training, meant that the groups were willing to pay for the service ongoing. So I think that's just a nice point that we should continue to focus on, because the sustainability of the groups, of course, is always a question. But with that, we'll have to close. I want to thank you all of our speakers for contributing your extensive expertise on this topic. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you in Washington, D.C. on September 28th through 30th, 2016, during the 10th anniversary of the Global Youth Economic Opportunity Summit. We are accepting applications for breakout sessions until March 25th on a variety of topics, so please check out the website. And you can learn more about the application process and this leading conference and convening for stakeholders working to expand youth economic opportunities at www.youtheosummit.org. At Making Sense, we strive to evaluate how well our events promote learning in terms of both content and delivery. So after this webinar, you'll be redirected to an evaluation, which will take about 2 minutes to complete. We really appreciate your completion of this evaluation so that we can create the most relevant and interesting learning events for you in the future. This webinar will also be recorded and posted on www.youtheconomicopportunities.org. You will receive a link via email. If you found this webinar useful, please promote it through sending my emails, tweeting, other social media. Again, thank you for your participation. We look forward to collaborating with you on future knowledge management activities designed to strengthen the field of youth economic opportunities. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, Catherine, Rachel, Matt, and Stella.